Sometimes the brightest lights don't just illuminate wealth, they expose what wealth has chosen to bury. And sometimes the one you refuse to see is the one carrying the mirror to your shame. The night I stepped into that hall, the world felt colder than the streets I slept on. Outside, winter gnawed at the city with teeth of glass. Inside, it was a different world, a temple of wealth. Crystal chandeliers spilled molten light across white marble floors. The air smelled of French wine, old money, and something even stronger. Arrogance dressed as elegance. Men in tailored tuxedos swirled champagne, laughing in a language of coded cruelty. Women in sequined gowns glided past like they were born of glass and privilege. Waiters moved like shadows, silent and unnoticed, carrying platters of food more expensive than the rent of the shelter I had been turned away from just 2 nights before. And then there was me. A coat too thin for December, shoes split at the seams, hair tied back with a ribbon that wasn't a ribbon at all, just a strip of cloth torn from a blanket. I smelled of rainwater in the city's forgotten corners. But I walked in as though I belonged there, because for once in my life, I wasn't there to survive. I was there to haunt them. Gasps cut through the music like small knives. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Someone whispered, "Is she lost?" Someone else muttered, "Who allowed her in?" The host, a man whose name opened banks and closed factories, approached with a smile carved from ice. His suit was worth more than the wages I was denied. His watch ticked with the heartbeat of another world. "Excuse me, miss," he said, holding the microphone like a weapon hidden behind courtesy. "This is a private event." I met his eyes and smiled, not out of politeness, but because I saw something flicker in them. Recognition, a shadow he thought he buried with the years. "Do you remember me?" I asked. The room shifted. Reporters, always thirsty for something to devour, raised their cameras. Guests craned their necks, eager for a scandal to entertain their expensive boredom. But my voice did not tremble. It had trembled for too many winters already. "I used to work in your factory," I said, loud enough for the walls to carry my words. "Before your machines took my hands, before your men took my wages, before your lawyers took my voice." The hall fell into a strange, gilded silence. Some sipped their drinks, pretending not to hear. Others stared, calculating whether pity was fashionable tonight. And then, as I stood there, wet from the snow, unwanted as a memory, they began to whisper the words that always follow people like me. Homeless, troublemaker. Why doesn't she just go away? But I didn't. Not tonight. Not. I pulled out a folded paper from my coat, creased, stained, nearly torn at the edges. It was a letter, a promise written years ago, signed by the very man now standing before me. A promise that their company would care for its workers if injury fell upon them. It was a promise broken the moment my body broke under their machines. The host tried to laugh it off. "Miss, this is not the time." "This is the only time," I cut in. My voice was soft, but it struck like iron. "Because for years you dined while I starved. You built empires while I buried my child. And tonight, in the house you built on our bones, I am here, not to beg for bread, but to give you a memory that will not wash off." A ripple of unease moved across the room. For the first time, the chandeliers didn't look beautiful. They looked like teeth dangling over their heads. Two security guards stepped forward, ready to escort me out. But by then, the cameras were already pointed at me. Reporters smelled blood in the water. Rich blood. They didn't care about me. They cared about the story I had just set on fire. "If you drag me out tonight," I said, "you will drag out the truth with me, and it will scream louder than I ever could." The guards hesitated. The host clenched his jaw. The crowd shifted, half eager to see a scandal unfold, half praying they wouldn't have to take a side. And then from the far end of the room came the first tear. A young woman in an emerald gown stood up. Her earrings glimmered like fallen stars, but her eyes belonged to a different world. They glistened with something dangerous for that room. Memory. "I remember her," she said, voice breaking. "She used to work in the East Wing plant. My father," her words cracked. "My father said the factory shut down because of losses." I held her gaze, and for a moment I saw the child she once was, the one who used to sneak into the factory floor and bring workers coffee on cold mornings. The host's face turned pale. He glanced at the guests, donors, partners, wolves in velvet. Enough, he said, voice tightening. Security, remove her. But the room no longer moved to his command. The guests had tasted something they hadn't in years. Guilt dressed as drama, and guilt makes a better wine than champagne. The young woman stepped forward. Let her speak, she said. And just like that, the gala, built on centuries of polished silence, became a courtroom without walls. I placed the letter on the table near the microphone stand. My hands were trembling now, not from fear but from the weight of years. My child's face flashed in my mind, the cold night when help never came, the promise that rotted like fruit left in the dark. You built fortunes, I said, on people who can no longer afford a name. Tonight I carry their names in my pockets, and I let a handful of small faded ID cards fall to the floor. Faces of the workers lost, forgotten, erased. Some guests covered their mouths, some turned away. The music that once charmed the hall had gone silent as a prayer. I didn't come for their food. I didn't come for their pity. I came because they needed to remember what it feels like to be seen. The hall, for the first time in decades, felt human. And as the cameras flashed and the billionaire host trembled with the weight of his own history, I whispered, not to them, but to the night outside those walls. This is not revenge. This is the beginning of truth. The gala is now burning under the heat of one woman's courage. Billionaires are shaken, secrets are rising, and the crowd is torn between spectacle and conscience. The gala had fallen into a silence so thick it could be felt in the throat. People who had once whispered behind her back were now staring at the black woman who stood beneath the blazing chandelier, her ragged coat now folded neatly over a chair, her posture regal in its simplicity. They had seen her enter as a shadow, but now she spoke with a presence that made even the most powerful men feel suddenly small. She moved closer to the microphone they had used earlier to announce meaningless awards, plaques for profit, trophies for greed. You don't know me, her voice was calm, yet there was a steel beneath it. But I know you. I have cleaned your streets. I have been shoved from your doorsteps. I have begged for a crust while you threw feasts. Her eyes swept the room, not in anger but with a kind of piercing sorrow that carried weight far heavier than rage. The richest of them shifted uncomfortably, their partners clutching their glasses, unsure if they should stand or slip away. No one dared to move. You called me a nuisance, she continued, but tonight I call you to remember what it means to be human. Gasps rustled through the room, not because of the words, but because of the way they struck something buried deep in those who had forgotten their own fragility. A few eyes welled up, others narrowed with the sharpness of pride wounded by truth. A billionaire at the front table stood, his expensive suit glittering with threads of gold. Who are you to lecture us? He snapped. This is a private event. She turned to him slowly, and for a brief second, the old fear threatened to rise. Memories of nights cold and alone, of voices like his telling her she was nothing, but not tonight. Who am I? She said, and a hush swept over again. I am the woman your company laid off when it swallowed my husband's wages and left my children hungry. I am the woman who built your cities with blistered hands while you signed contracts in warm rooms. I am the woman you didn't see, until now. Cameras flashed. Phones were raised. The same people who had looked through her now recorded her, as if trying to capture redemption in pixels. Then she did something no one expected. She pulled out an envelope. Inside were names, dozens of them. Men and women who had once been part of the gala's elite, now jobless because of corporate greed, blacklisted for demanding fairness. These are the people you discarded like trash, she said. Tonight, this gala celebrates future innovation. Tell me, what future is built on broken lives? Murmurs turned to whispers, and whispers turned to an unsettling quiet, the kind that wraps around a room like a cold wind. One woman, one of the heiresses, stood with trembling lips. I remember you, she said softly. You used to clean the floors at my father's company. Her voice cracked. I'm I'm sorry. The homeless woman looked at her gaze neither harsh nor forgiving, just honest. You don't owe me sorry, she replied. You owe the world change. By now the doors of the gala had swung open. Reporters had rushed in, alerted by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Flashes painted the walls white. The black woman's face, once hidden in alleys and shelters, now glowed on the screens of those watching from the streets. And then came the moment that broke them. From behind her, two young children emerged. Her children, dressed in clothes that still carried the scent of struggle, but eyes full of a light that no gala could buy. This is why I came, she said, resting a hand on their shoulders. So they would never have to beg for a place at a table that was built on their silence. Tears spilled freely now, not only from those who pitied, but from those who realized how small their empires were compared to the enormity of dignity. The host of the gala, a man whose face graced magazine covers, walked slowly towards her. What? What do you want? He asked, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance. She smiled faintly. Nothing from you, she said, only that you listen. And remember that the people you step over on your way up are the same ones who could one day hold your world in their hands. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in an unsettled mix of shame, awe, and something like respect. Later that night, as she left the gala, reporters followed. Some asked if she would sue, others if she would run for office. She only said, I came here to remind them that a title means nothing if your soul is bankrupt. Within weeks, the story had gone viral. The billionaires were called to hearings, their foundations questioned, their wealth forced to reckon with the suffering it stood upon. And the woman? She was no longer homeless. Donations poured in, not from pity, but from people who saw in her the courage they wished they had. Years later, one of her children became a doctor, the other a teacher. And in interviews, they would say, our mother taught us the most important lesson, that being unseen does not make you powerless. Silence is the seat of their comfort. Speaking is the crack in their throne. And somewhere under a quieter sky, the woman herself walked freely, not as a shadow among towers, but as a name they would not forget.